What are the primary factors contributing to Europe's population crisis, and how have these trends evolved over time? Today we're tackling a pressing issue that's been making headlines. Europe's population crisis is on the verge of exploding. Join us as we delve into the demographic challenges facing Europe. From declining birth rates to aging populations, here we're gonna explore the potential consequences of the crisis and discuss what it means for the future of the continent. Let's dive right in. Is Europe facing an immigration crisis? As anti-immigrant sentiment rises across Europe, inflammatory rhetoric increasingly warns of an uncontrolled flood of immigrants overwhelming societies and economies. Some politicians and movements claim Europe faces an imminent immigration crisis that threatens livelihoods, cultures, and security. However, a thorough examination of the evidence reveals a much more nuanced reality. While legitimate concerns exist, data shows the rate of new arrivals has dropped substantially from the peak levels in 2015-16. Numerous studies also debunk assumptions about immigrants committing crimes at higher rates than native citizens or taking jobs and benefits. Though risks like terrorism demand vigilance, statistics do not support assertions of mass migration spiraling out of control. In fact, responsible levels of immigration provides vital economic benefits for aging European nations facing demographic declines. With strong immigration policies, new arrivals can replenish workforces, spur innovation, create jobs, and drive growth. But realizing these gains requires avoiding xenophobic reactions and understanding the drivers behind migration flows. Overall, facts contradict the exaggeration of an uncontrolled immigration crisis. Instead of panic and antagonism, Europe needs pragmatic reforms addressing valid anxieties through compassionate policymaking. The primary source of fears around runaway immigration stem from the 2015 European migrant crisis, when over 1 million migrants and refugees arrived in Europe, mostly from Syria. Images of vast encampments and chaotic land and sea crossings stoked anxieties that Europe had lost control of its borders. This shocking inflow represented the largest annual wave of immigration since World War II. However, what occurred was an exceptional crisis, not the new normal. After emergency responses finally coordinated, the number of new arrivals decreased sharply by over 90% between 2015 and 2019. Despite a small increase in 2021, last year's asylum applications remain 86% below the 2015 peak. While the risk of new crises persists, data shows migration levels are reverting from emergency to manageable rates. Long-term demographic projections estimate natural population growth through immigration could compensate for Europe's low fertility rates and prevent dangerous population decline through 2050. According to EU data, migration already accounted for over 80% of European population growth from 2011 to 2021. Managed correctly, immigration may prove economically vital, not an existential threat. Beyond numbers alone, research on the impacts of historical and recent immigration debunk assumptions of excessive crime or economic harm. In Germany, the crime rate among immigrants matches the national average, with non-German youths actually committing more drug offenses. In Italy, immigrants do not disproportionately tap welfare benefits. Studies consistently find minimal long-term effects on wages or employment for native workers in Western European countries. No doubt the scope of immigration presents serious governance challenges around integration, social cohesion, and extremism. Legitimate debates persist on culture, values, and security, but facts contradict hyperbole about waves of immigrants promoting violence or ruining economies. While vigilance is justified, evidence does not support rhetoric portraying immigration overall as an imminent crisis too enormous for Europe to integrate humanly, safely, and successfully. What explains the rise of anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe? Today's resurgence of anti-immigrant politics defies post-war Europe's hard-won tolerance, suggesting a complex interplay of cultural factors more than economic realities. High-profile incidents like crime and terror attacks have inflamed xenophobia despite immigrants' falling or equal crime rates compared to native citizens, as memories of World War II atrocities fade. Prejudice has returned, targeting marginalized groups like Muslims and Roma associated with new arrivals. Meanwhile, manipulative far-right leaders capitalize on these societal insecurities by scapegoating immigrants to revive reactionary nationalism. The roots of today's hostility trace back to cultural upheavals in recent decades that appended comforting notions of European homogeneity developed during post-war recovery and integration. High-profile terror attacks by Islamic extremists reinforced fears of the Muslim other suddenly arriving in larger numbers from very different societies. The historically rapid influx of Muslim immigrants from Middle East and North African countries challenged cultural norms in historically Christian majority nations. Right-wing populist leaders expertly exploited these disruptions to resuscitate nationalistic xenophobia and position Muslim immigrants as the source of myriad social and economic woes. By blaming newcomers, they tapped into reactionary impulses for cultural self-preservation and flourished by pleading renewed nationalism. Their emotionally compelling rhetoric, vilifying immigrants as criminals or extremists, succeeded by amplifying visceral fears and prejudices, not facts. The global financial crisis and subsequent regional economic stagnation also fueled societal conditions ripe for scapegoating immigrants. High unemployment left many Europeans feeling left behind, anxious over lost financial security and status. Charismatic nationalists captured this discontent by misdirecting anger onto immigrants and refugees as the cause of hardship rather than complex macro forces or local policy failures. As memories of World War II fade along with the post-war generations who built European integration, the resurgence of reactionary ideologies is not entirely surprising, but remains deeply concerning. While valid debate exists on culture and security, progress demands maintaining facts and moral clarity over fears and prejudice. By upholding egalitarian values, mainstream parties can counter the far right's exploitation of visceral anxieties. Europe must address its formidable challenges through reason and compassion, not regression into racism. Should irregular migration be stopped at any cost, as a record tide of displaced migrants and refugees sought to reach Europe's shores in 2015 and 16? Desperate leaders debated how far to go in efforts to halt uncontrolled arrivals. While broader security is essential, some nations consider excessively harsh deterrents like physical barriers, migrant pushbacks, and mass detention that raise legal and ethical issues. However, evidence suggests such draconian steps often backfire in practice while undermining values. Images of vast migrant camps and risky sea crossings spurred understandable public demands for restored control of borders as irregular entries overwhelmed capacity in frontline states like Greece and Italy. With the very idea of open internal European travel under Schengen threatened, leaders felt pressure to put forth a tough response. Some defended concerning practices like migrant pushbacks or mass asylum claim denials as necessary to send a message deterring future irregular arrivals. However, research on deterrence theory suggests such blunt tools rarely work as intended when confronted with true human desperation. Those literally fleeing life-threatening conflict or persecution will likely undertake even riskier, remote routes if easier options vanish. Asylum applications in Europe have continued shifting from Mediterranean routes towards more perilous crossings through Atlantic and Eastern border regions as restrictions hardened. There are no simple solutions in the conflict's field situated at the intersection of security, human rights, and moral obligations. Nations have valid interest in securing borders and reducing uncontrolled flows. However, democracies committed to humanitarian ideals cannot justify extreme deterrence measures that abandon innocent people or erode fundamental principles. The path forward demands balancing compassion, interest, and pragmatism. Real progress requires addressing root causes, not just symptoms. How should Europe integrate its immigrant populations? As immigrants and minorities from rapid growing shares of Europe's population, integrating diverse communities emerges as pivotal to social cohesion and shared economic progress. However, flawed policies cluster disadvantaged groups into neglected enclaves, bleeding alienation and unrest. Avoiding renewed tensions requires learning from past failures to proactively foster inclusive assimilation and advancement. During earlier waves of immigration, steady employment and education enabled gradual cultural integration and upward mobility over generations. However, modern policies abandoned this measured approach, instead concentrating new immigrant generations into isolated low-income communities with few opportunities. Predictably stark inequality and lack of social mixing generated cultural separation and sometimes extremism. Renewed violence and polarization in cities like Paris and Stockholm revealed the pressing need to rethink failed integration policies and rebuild social contracts on past lessons of assimilation. Equal access to employment, public housing dispersion, anti-discrimination laws, language and civic education, public service paths for immigrants and their descendants. Success requires reversing the marginalizations of groups that feel excluded from society. With vision and courage, leaders can reclaim Europe's legacy of pluralism rooted in common values that transcends ethnicity or religion. Ceding to reactionary nationalism will only ossify divisions, widen inequality, and squander vital human capital. There are no quick fixes to deeply rooted integration challenges. Only thorough comprehensive reforms, reasserting progressive values can Europe integrate and benefit from immigrant origin families as it did in past eras. This difficult work demands rejecting the lure of blame and fear-mongering from populist extremists. While immigration poses real cultural adjustment, only a shared future based on human dignity and equality can ensure the lasting peace and unlock the full promise of diverse societies. By revitalizing the principles of post-war integration on an even broader scale, people united by values can write Europe's next chapter. As we conclude our exploration of Europe's population crisis, it's clear that the issue carries significant implications for the continent's future. If you found this discussion informative and thought-provoking, don't forget to show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue to bring you more in-depth analysis and discussions on pressing global issues. Feel free to share your thoughts and insights in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay informed.